Prime Minister, in a newspaper you know well, the Daily Telegraph, Kim Darroch, the former British ambassador to Washington, said we need to ready for a Russian nuclear strike over Ukraine. In the 3 months of the war, how many threats have there been from Vladimir Putin to deploy some form of nuclear weapons?
Well, there's an analysis that I think has been done by somebody recently, that a think tank, that they're looking at about sort of 35 mentions, or perhaps it's a little bit more now, of that issue. But I think it's very, very important that we shouldn't, Nick, allow ourselves to be sidetracked by this kind of saber rattling, because fundamentally what Putin is trying to do is to reframe this and say it's about Russia versus NATO. It's about, a standoff of that kind. It's not. It's about his attack on an entirely innocent country with conventional weapons, with artillery, bombardments with planes, shells, and so on. And it's about the Ukrainians' right to protect themselves. That is what this is about. And what you had today at NATO was yet again the alliance being tested, being asked, being interrogated. Are we resolved? Are we determined? Will we give the Ukrainians the means to protect themselves? And the answer was absolutely yes. And if anything, the strength of the unity is greater than it was before.
But 35 times he's possibly threatened to go nuclear. What is the response?
I've just given you my response, which is that I think it's very important we don't get drawn into a discussion that favours the way Putin wants to frame this. He wants to present it as a standoff between NATO and Russia. That's not what this is. This is about his wanton, illegal, unprovoked act of aggression against a sovereign, independent country.
Everyone is speaking well at NATO. Everyone's speaking in a...
So it's about now changing the dynamic. Volodymyr Zelensky has some ideas about how to move things forward. Plainly, the Ukrainians can recapture ground. They're very dynamic. Look at what's just happened in Snake Island today. Putin's had to cede that. And what that shows is, and there's a lesson for this, from this, he is in the end going to find it impossible to hold down a country he doesn't own.
Let me ask you about the end. Does it have to end with Putin out of the Kremlin, by fair means or foul?
I just think no, of course not. And I just don't think it...
He can negotiate a peace.
I would just make a point that I think everyone needs to bear in mind, is that the Russian president actually enjoys very considerable levels of public support at the moment in Russia, and that is.
Do they have a choice?
That is you can. I don't know how you measure these things, but
you go to jail for 14 years if you tune into the BBC or LBC.
I think considerable margin of manoeuvre, political margin of manoeuvre, to say, look, I went in. I had to achieve certain things, and it would be up to him to specify what he thought that those were. But in the interests of peace, in the interests of the world, I think the time has come now to bring the technical military operation to an end and to withdraw and to seek a new arrangement. That, I think, is what he should do.
As we're talking military, can you explain to me why at this time your government will oversee the reduction of troops in the British Army to a level not seen since the Napoleonic Wars? Explain the rationale.
I'll tell you what is in the integrated review. If you read the integrated review...
I haven't read it in detail, but you explain it.
Okay,
why does that make sense?
So we set out a year or so ago a fantastic document which explains how the UK sees the world and how... First of all, we're investing massively in our armed forces. Biggest uplift since the end of the Cold War, £24 billion more. Last year, the UK was the 3rd biggest spender on defence in the world. We're now at 2.3% of our GDP, way above most of the people around the table in NATO. So on the specific point about each individual soldier or each individual airman or woman or
sailor,
or sailor, right? What the issue for us is, how do you make our army as agile, as lethal, as capable as possible? How do you make sure they have the equipment?
By taking personnel away.
How do you make sure they have the equipment, the training, the technology they need to defeat
By giving them less blokes and women?
By making sure that they have the kit that they need that is absolutely indispensable. Secondly, don't forget that when we actually engage in combat, we engage as an alliance, and the UK typically is going to be way out in front when it comes to look at our naval contributions, enormous. Look at what we can do on cyber. So it's about having of course you've got to have a big enough army. You've got to have enough troops. You've got to have enough muscle power to do what you need to do.
All right.
That's crucial. I'm not going to. We'll never make any concessions there. But you've also got to make sure that the troops you do have are properly equipped.
All right. You've pledged another £1 billion to Ukraine today. That takes the amount of money sent to around 2.5 billion. To those who say you care a lot about the people of Kyiv, but not Keighley, how would you respond?
I think, on the contrary.
Well, where's the help for them?
So what we're doing, straight away, what we're doing is helping them just in a week or so. You've got £1,200 going for 8 million most vulnerable households in the country. We've got, the total package there is about 37 billion pounds that we're putting in to help people around the country. Just with things like the costs of energy. Everybody's going to get £400 to help them with the cost of energy. Pensions another £300. Cuts in council tax. In a few weeks, couple of weeks, you'll be getting the national insurance tax cut. That will take another.
Will there be another fuel cut in fuel duty?
Look, I'm not going to comment on further fiscal measures that the Chancellor.
Can you rule it out?
I'm not going to comment on further fiscal measures that the Chancellor.
It's a possibility.
Logically speaking, everything that I don't rule out, such as the moon is made of green cheese, is a
I'm not going to ask you that. I'll give you my word.
There are all sorts of things that I'm not going to rule out.
So it's a possibility.
And it's a possibility.
You said we all had
Elvis will be reincarnated as Nick Ferrari.
Well, who God forbid? No.
Whatever.
You said earlier this week we all have to dig deep to beat Putin. How are you digging deep?
Look, I think that what I mean by that is that.
No, but how are you digging deep? How are you showing? I've read that you wanted a £150,000 treehouse for your children. What? Is that digging deep?
Look, I'm not going to comment on my children or.
It's not your children, is it? It's a treehouse.
And it doesn't.
I'm not asking about your children.
And it doesn't exist.
It wasn't true.
And I'm not going to comment on things in my.
So that's a fabrication
life.
as well.
I'm not going to comment on things in my family life. If you want me to talk about,
it's a treehouse. It's not your family life, Prime Minister.
On the contrary, it isn't. But I'm going to talk about. If you want to talk about infrastructure that we are building, then let me tell you about the gigabit broadband that we're putting in. Let me talk, which has gone up under my premiership from like 7% of penetration across the country to 69%, Nick. Can I talk about the biggest investment in railways for 100 years?
Can I read you the charge sheet?
Building, I point out that last year I think we built 245,000
I'd like to move
more
on
homes.
to the police.
We helped 400,000 people to be first-time buyers. That's the type of infrastructure that actually is happening.
Can I read you the charge sheet for the Metropolitan Police, a force that you were very close to when you were Mayor of London? Yeah. 69,000 crimes unrecorded, botched investigations into Stephen Port, the Sarah Everard case. Your close colleague, Kit Malthouse, your deputy mayor, when you were Mayor of London, said if he'd have been under this, he would have quit. Had you been mayor, would you have quit with that appalling record for the mayor?
I think, and I have said this, I think one of the things that you do when you leave jobs is you shouldn't actually spend your time endlessly dumping on your predecessor. But the problem is that I used to be Mayor of London, and,
you did, yes.
And we cut crime by about 20%. I think we cut, not just shy of 20%, and we cut some types of crime very considerably, particularly the most serious and violent crimes.
Well, I've got to get a comment on how
murder.
The Met is
so
in
what I would
special
say,
measures.
what I would say is, I just think the Met needs the City Hall has got to grip this thing. In the end, the Mayor of London, one of his jobs, one of his titles is he's the Commissioner for Police in London, and he should grip it. He has the responsibility. He hires.
So what should he be doing?
The police chief.
What would you be doing?
The first thing to do is to make sure we get the next commissioner is the right person, and we'll have to go through a process there. But the City Hall has the budgets. They have the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime. You know how it works. The Mayor's Office of Police and Crime, the MOPAC, sets the targets, sets the ambitions. We said we were going to cut neighbourhood crime by 20%, and we said we were going to tackle knife crime. Do you remember? And so what we did is we said to the police, who I love and who I think are brilliant, we said, okay, we're going to back you with stop and search. We're going to help you with the law. We're going to back you up. And they took, I think, the first year and a half, they took 11,000 knives off the streets of London.
Okay.
And do you remember how difficult it was?
Operation Blunt. I remember Operation Blunt.
Those
yes,
figures started to come down.
But
because
today,
we took a very, very no-nonsense approach.
But Prime Minister, today nationally, 1 in 7 police forces are in special measures. 1 in 7. What action will you and Priti Patel take about that?
I think, first of all, we're making sure that they're properly held to account through the police and crime commissioners. And actually, I think many of those guys and women do a fantastic job. They need to be looking at their forces and really asking for better results. But overall, neighbourhood crimes across the whole of the UK are now down 31% since we began. We've got, I think, about 13,576 more officers of the 20,000 we promised out on the streets. That they're starting to. I'm not going to pretend to you that it's everything's fixed everywhere, but neighbourhoods are becoming safer. Streets, communities are becoming safer, and that's a fantastic thing. That is the essential prerequisite for long-term economic growth.
I want to just cover a couple of other areas. You'll be aware, COVID, the cases are rising again.
Yes.
275,000 per day. There's a projection 300,000 next week. That would be the highest level for all but 3 weeks of the pandemic, Prime Minister. What are the contingency plans for handling another outbreak?
The most important thing is vaccination. And that's
but are there contingency plans? Would we ever see steps again, restrictions again?
I think that we see no reason for that at the moment. The most important thing is vaccination.
So what would be the number that would make you consider that?
We're not seeing the types of pressures on the medical services that would lead us to anything like that. But my message to people is what I've said before: get vaccinated.
Okay, couple of last things. You've been out of the country almost as long as Lord Lucan, so you might.
Come on, I mean,
well, you've been away quite a long time.
You don't even know he's been away.
I mean, that's not a bad response, actually, Prime Minister.
I'd like to. That's what I found that rather suspicious. How do you know that?
And I can't show you my notes.
Were you involved?
I can't turn over my notes.
Of Lord Lucan.
I was a reporter with the Express, and I'm guilty.
You need to come clean here. And how do you know the whereabouts of Lord Lucan?
I think I saw him on Madrid High Street, actually, interestingly enough. And while you've been away, the Conservatives have become about as popular as a dose of monkeypox. You've lost a safe seat, a seat you just won, and your party chairman. The idea of an early election is ridiculous, isn't it? You need to go long.
Totally. Well, I mean, look, I'm not going to. What I decided, by the way.
Well, I'm glad you agree. There's no early election. You need every day.
No. Look, actually, I mean, I'm not going to comment on.
No, you agreed. You're going long.
No, hang on. Well, I want to be very clear with people because they always ask me these types of questions. You know, blah blah blah. Elections, committees, etc.
Of course they do. You're the Prime Minister. Don't be surprised. You used to do it for a job.
Right, exactly.
Precisely. So don't be surprised that we're doing it now.
Exactly. But let me give you the demarcation, right? What my job is to talk about the government's agenda.
Yes.
To talk about policy. To talk about the UK. To talk about how we're fixing the cost of living problems, the cost of living crisis, talk about everything we're doing to strengthen the UK economy, our plan for a stronger economy, which is what I believe. Talk about levelling up, the agenda for taking this country forward. That's what I want. That's what I am actually meant to talk about. Now, you, in all your genius, what you are meant to talk about. One of the things is
to hold you to account.
Your analysis.
To ask how long you've got as PM to deliver on your manifesto. That's perfectly justified. Have you got 2 years? Have you got 2 months? But anyway, we're going long, so that's all right.
I'm going to deliver on our...
Lastly, a policy that apparently is gaining a lot of attraction within some of your colleagues, not least some of your northern representatives, the idea of grammar schools. Prime Minister, where are you on that?
Look, I've always been in favour of academic competition. I think it's... And many schools now have policies of selective admission in sixth forms. I think we should, I'm not against that in principle. All I would say is that what I want is good schools everywhere. And I want everybody...
Well, they're not mutually exclusive, Prime Minister.
They're not.
Just because you're grammar, the others can be super
Completely right. Completely right. But, and I think that competition is a damn fine thing, very important, and leads to excellence. And provided it's provided you encourage competition in a way that doesn't make everybody who fails feel totally miserable, you'll get some pretty good results.
Are we going to get anyone else to Rwanda by you and Prince Charles? Those seem to be the only two people we've managed to get there so far.
No, on the
Prime
contrary,
Minister.
what you got to
it's hardly a howling success, is it?
Well, look, I think that actually, if you look at the Rwanda policy. Funnily enough, not something that is much commented on by some parts of the media, but Joe Biden is doing something very similar with Mexico, trying to send people from Mexico, ping them straight to Spain. The Danes are doing something very similar. I think it's entirely sensible to develop a partnership like that with Rwanda. Now, you didn't come on the Rwanda leg.
I did
you
not.
should have done, because lots of people did.
Well, I
And
think
they
you
saw,
did
wait. They
Let's
saw,
give a short
go and ask
decision.
them.
Okay.
They saw, actually, the scales fell from their eyes. They saw a country that is really going places. They had a totally different view of what it could mean. And if you talk to Paul Kagame and the Rwandan government, they see this. They're rather shocked by some of the coverage in the UK of this whole thing. They see this as an opportunity for us to make progress together on a very difficult issue. How do you beat the gangs who are sending people to their deaths across the channel? How do you fix that? The Rwanda policy, and I said when I launched it, it would take ages and ages to get through the
Well, some
courts.
say you build a centre at Calais. Some would say that, Prime Minister.
Yeah, of course, but you need a returns agreement with the EU, and that hasn't been forthcoming. So you need Rwanda, and that's what we're doing.